Hey everybody, welcome back to BobkeTV time once again, and I know everybody's excited about this for the broom wagon. All right, coming up, the good, the bad, the controversial, the brutal, the ugly from the Giro d'Italia. We've got tweet of the week, we've got musette musings, and of course, we've got neutral zone news. But let me just say this to begin with, before we get too deep into it. The context and the implications of Chris Froome's success in the Giro d'Italia, I'll talk about in the musette musings. But to start with, we'll just concentrate on the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, everybody, the good. Chris Froome. Whoo, baby. 80 Ks by himself, solo. One of the most audacious and consequently controversial stage wins and ascension to leader's jersey in recent memory of Grand Tours. A lot of comparisons have been made, fairly or not, to other similar efforts. But the most recent comparisons go way back to 2006. And I would say Chris Froome's ride on stage number 19 to Bardonecchia, where he took over 3 minutes out of the chasers after riding 80 kilometers by himself, comes in an era of cycling where we measure the differences between even the podium in a matter of seconds, not in big, gigantic chunks of time. Froome's ride's been compared to the exploits going way back to the 1940s of Fausto Coppi. And so it's pretty obvious to any observer that the sport has changed exponentially since then. And we don't generally see races decided with massive solo annihilations of the best riders on the planet in a Grand Tour in recent years. Especially when we look at Chris Froome's Giro up until the last rest day in the last week. You can only characterize it as subpar for the first 2.5 weeks. But Froome started showing signs of life in the stage 16 time trial. At that point in the race, Simon Yates seemed to still be in firm command and control of the pink jersey and the overall standings. But Chris Froome was only 13 seconds slower than Tom Dumoulin. Tom Dumoulin third on the stage and Froome right in there, and taking a lot of time out of the riders between himself and Simon Yates, with the exception of Tom Dumoulin, who is maybe the best time trial on the planet right now. World champion, consistently in the Grand Tours, crushes the time trial, used that to win the Giro last year. So it seems as if Chris Froome was starting to ride better after the last rest day in the last week. He had won on the Zoncolan, an impressive win there also, chased to the line by Simon Yates in the pink jersey. And it seemed as if that was going to be enough to salvage his Giro. Apparently, Froome did not get the memo on that would have been a sufficient Giro after not being at his best throughout the first 80% of the race, 75% of the race. Is that fair to say? But as audacious as it was still incredibly controversial, and we'll get to that in the musette musings. I'd like to say now that Dave Brailsford can stop explaining why that happened anytime he feels it's appropriate. Sugar and water at frequent intervals is not something that Team Sky just invented on stage 19 of the Giro. So if we can get that cleared up right now, I'd appreciate it. Do you think that Chris Froome and Team Sky are the only people that understand the importance of carbohydrates and hydration? That's ridiculous. So Dave Brailsford, please save your plans and your masterminding for somebody else besides people where you've already pushed the envelope of industrial levels of lying to incredulity. So thanks, Dave Brailsford, for not commenting anymore on Christopher on silly things that have no effect on what exactly was going on stage 19. The tactics played out on that stage could be entered into the equation, but still, to think that Chris Froome rode 80 kilometers by himself to get into the leader's jersey when it seemed like all was lost, not that many days before that. It's just, we'll get into that in the Musette Musings, but taken on face value, it was a stupefying and incredible ride. I would love to believe that that's how good Chris Froome is. But the context, like I said, we'll get into that in a little while. And what it means, that's what I'd like to really get into, what it means for the sport moving forward, what it means to the sport historically, and the long-term implications for the sport of cycling being an authentic spectacle that people can enjoy for its own merits. We'll get into that in a little while. Let's go on to some more good, shall we? Tom Dumoulin, not a bad ride. By the way, he might be awarded the Giro title at some point in the near or not so near future. Second in the overall standings, only 40 seconds slower than Chris Froome. Tom Dom was consistent. He was solid in the time trials. If you look at both of the time trials, he was right there where he needed to be against all of his rivals and against similar rivals that he had last year in the Giro, except for Chris Froome. Won the opening time trial, got a day in the pink jersey, and finished second for the time being overall, and far ahead of all of his other rivals. So a very, very good ride by Tom Dumoulin and a step in his progression towards eventually winning the Tour de France. Also, Miguel Angel Lopez, another big step forward. Miguel Angel Lopez had been criticized by his sports director throughout the opening couple of weeks of the Giro d'Italia for not paying attention, for not trusting his teammates, for not taking care of himself. In the end, however, wound up third, subject to change, might be moving up, and maybe more importantly, in the best young riders jersey after an incredible battle that went all the way to stage 20, the last day in the mountains, with Richard Carapaz, a new big star from Ecuador, on the horizon. So a great battle for the white jersey and Miguel Angel Lopez. I picked him in a couple of years past as perhaps the first Colombian winner of the Tour de France. And since then, Egan Bernal has demonstrated he is an incredible talent that is to be reckoned with. Miguel Angel Lopez, just 24 years of age, he might have a chance to win the Tour before Egan Bernal does that. Time will tell. But a great Giro by Lopez, and praised by Vinokourov, his team manager, at the end of the Giro. And that was certainly warranted. So good ride by Miguel Angel Lopez, and plenty more to come from the Colombian superstar. Elia Viviani, restoring a little bit of Italian pride. We'll get to that in a second, in the not so good. 4 stage wins, was the dominant sprinter in the Giro. Not a really good sprint field. I think Tour of California had a much better sprint field. And the question, it asks a question. Could Viviani, under normal circumstances, beat Cavendish, Kittel, and Greipel? And I say yes. I say the answer is yes, but could he beat his own teammate, Fernando Gaviria? I don't think so. No, I'm going to say no, that's not what's going to happen. Also to the good, Sam Bennett, 3 stage wins from the Boer squad, and gives Peter Sagan a tremendous ally. At some point, they might have to decide who is going to work for who in the last kilometer of the sprints. It might be not what you think. It might be Sagan working for Bennett. Time will tell. Also to the good, Adam Hansen, 20th Grand Tour in a row. That's absolutely unbelievable. Giro, Tour, Vuelta, 20 in a row. That's a record I hope nobody even tries to beat. Wasn't supposed to start the Giro. Last minute call up. Should have stopped the record at 19, but went on to set an I don't know if that will ever be beaten. I'm not sure who's second on that list currently, but 20 in a row for Adam Hansen. It probably will be beaten in the past, but that is an incredible benchmark. All right, the bad. Woo! United Arab Emirates in the time trial. A few minutes after the finish, when it was all said and done, oh my gosh, Fabio Aru was sitting 7th. He never done that. 6th, excuse me. Only 20 seconds slower than Chris Froome. And, 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds slower than Froome. An incredible ride by Fabio Aru, who had already lost quite a bit of time, and so was not looking at an overall placing, but trying to restore a little bit of confidence that his team had in him and pays him to race well. He was subsequently docked the time penalty that moved him down to 9th, I believe, and adding insult to an injurious Giro d'Italia for Fabio Aru already. 2 of his teammates also motor pacing. That's why they were assessed the time penalty. Diego Ulisi, who was 6th in the TT, moved to 45th, and Valerio Conti also. They were both docked 2 minutes, so 20-second time penalty for Aru, and huge chunks of time docked to the UAE squad. Also the bad, the Italians in the Giro, their home tour. Vincenzo Nibali not there, focusing on the Tour de France this year. Domenico Pozzovivo, not bad, 5th in the GC. He was looking for a podium place, but fell apart in the last couple of days, losing 8 minutes to Froome, to Bardonecchia. And apart from Ilia Viviani, there was very little to write home about for the Italians, a very lackluster Giro for the Italians. It happens, when you look at the sponsorship situation in Italy, it's pretty grim. You don't have any Italian sponsors. Bahrain is a project. UAE was built on the bones of the Lamprey team, the last World Tour team coming from Italy. So tough times in Italian cycling. And the reasons for that are maybe to be discussed at a different time when I have a lot more time. The ugly / brutal in the Giro. Simon Yates, an implosion on stage 19 while in the pink jersey, losing close to 40 minutes to Chris Froome, and any hope of winning the Giro d'Italia after what had been a spectacular race for Simon Yates. He had been riding fantastically up until then, and maybe a little bit too well, going for stage wins when he didn't need to, going all in the time trial on stage 16, and unable to recover for 18, 19, and 20, and just blowing all over on the stage to Bardonecchia. Also, Thibaut Pinot. I mean, this 3rd place on stage 19, stage 20, 45 minutes behind Froome, and behind, I guess that's the stage winner. So Thibaut Pinot into the hospital, from the podium to the hospital, and not finishing the Giro d'Italia with 1 day to go. I guess he caught pneumonia chasing Froome all over the Alps. Whew, baby, that's as ugly as it gets when you're at the level these riders are for purely physiological response to the effort required to win the 2018 Giro d'Italia. Like I said, we're not sure who the winner is going to be. We'll get to that in a moment in the Musette Musings. But next up, the Neutral Zone News. All right, everybody, in the Neutral Zone News, POC, or is it POC? And if so, what does that stand for? Please go to the comments section if you can illuminate me on this conundrum. POC, by the way, the sponsors of the EF squad have developed a new ceramic coating for jerseys and bib shorts that reduce abrasions in the event of a crash. So printed ceramic areas. It would surprise me if they were as breathable or as aerodynamic as other advanced textiles. You think that there'd be a little bit of a compromise if you coat it with ceramic, nanoparticles to cut down on the abrasions. But if they've solved this conundrum, hats off to POC. And even if they haven't, there's plenty of applications. My question, who did they get to test it? Nothing, I'm good. Look, Mom, no hands. And let's hope that the riders on the team and anybody that's wearing this stuff does not have to test it out. But hats off for a new technology by POC, or POC as the case may be. All right, everybody, next up, the Musette Musings. I guess everybody knows what's coming on the Musette Musings. Chris Froome's controversial ride in the Giro d'Italia. And how is it we find ourselves in this situation? Not universally praising a great ride, snatched from the jaws of defeat as it was by Chris Froome. How is it we find ourselves in this morass? And there's a number of reasons for that, in my opinion. I've already said that Froome should not be racing during this period of time since we found out about his elevated salbutamol levels at last year's Vuelta. We're going on 8 months without resolution on this, and that is inexcusable for the sport. So, but why has it gone on so long? And I'd like to say this. Number one, for whatever reason has been given by the UCI, by the race organizers, by Team Sky, by Chris Froome himself, whatever the reasons are to justify Froome racing this year need to be rectified. That is the overarching narrative of Chris Froome's relationship with the sport, and his results from the Giro d'Italia, like I said, may not stand. I'll get to that in a minute. But there's very likely possibility that he'll lose both the Vuelta and the Giro, and we will set ourselves back to the very dark days of cycling when that had happened before. Why has it gone on so long? I think one of the reasons is Froome's injunctions through his lawyers while this case is being adjudicated with the UCI. And no plausible explanation why he had twice the salbutamol in his urine, that's allowed, in 8 months. If Chris Froome, if the sport, and this is a silly hypothetical at this point, but there is a best case scenario for cycling, Froome is not racing. It's a great Giro, won by Tom Dumoulin, the defending champion, after a spectacular ride by Simon Yates, great rides by Miguel Angel Lopez, Domenico Pozzovivo, Richard Carapaz, Thibaut Pinot, and Tom Dumoulin is the overall winner, which it might turn out to be anyways, eventually. That would be the best case scenario. Cycling very rarely reaches for the best case scenario. And I asked myself before the Giro, what would be the worst case scenario? And for me, the worst case scenario would have been that Froome smashes everybody the whole Giro, and we have to wait until after the Tour de France before his salbutamol case is adjudicated, has gone through the system, and we have a resolution. We have some sort of answer to all of those questions. I could not have believed, I couldn't even imagine an even worse case scenario whereby Chris Froome is below his best, not riding nearly well enough to win a Grand Tour for 2.5 weeks, and then on stage 19 annihilates everybody. A lot of discussion about the tactics on the day, about the nutrition, about the situation as it unfolded, but all of those minutiae, all of those details will be lost as the years roll by, and we will be left with a stupefying, unbelievable reversal of fortune for Chris Froome at the Giro. Whether it lasts or not remains to be seen. But why is it cycling, compared to other pro sports, always seems to gravitate to the worst case scenario in every situation? It might be, this is another part of the problem for cycling. It might not be decided before the start of the Tour de France. ASO in their charter does have an option to bar teams and riders from starting that are embroiled in controversies like this. But legally, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Froome can appeal that to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And in 2009, not exactly the same situation, but Tom Bonin was blocked from racing the Tour by ASO, the owners and operators of the Tour, but then was allowed to start by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So this controversy is going to continue to rage on. It could have been avoided by Chris Froome not racing until the case is decided. Simple Simon. Wow. Cycling just doesn't like that, apparently. So there have been some defenders of Chris Froome. And initially, it looked like George Bennett had opened up a big can of worms by suggesting that Chris Froome had, quote-unquote, done Audacious. Bennett, having a good Giro, had some mechanical misfortune that was horrible on the Zone Collant stage, if I'm not mistaken, but did a good Giro and was really just absolutely shocked by Chris Froome. Not just that he won the stage, but he got the jersey. Got the lead jersey from 4th place, many minutes behind Simon Yates, who was leading going into that stage, and catapulted himself somehow into an unassailable lead in the Giro. So George Bennett clarified his statements and saying he is in no way trying to disparage or suggest that Chris Froome had not earned the pink jersey without breaking any rule. So, in effect, became one of Chris Froome's defenders. Paolo Tiralongo, he had a different take on it than George Bennett. He also weighed in. I think he's the coach of Miguel Angel Lopez. He's quoted as saying, Froome, unlike Floyd Landis, is not a donkey. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'd love to have Paolo clarify that statement in the near future. It'd be nice. The expression is, you don't make a thoroughbred out of a donkey, and referring to there's not enough drugs to make an untalented rider good enough to win professional bike races. So I'm not sure if he's suggesting that Chris Froome not being a donkey is a thoroughbred, or that Floyd Landis is a donkey and took so many drugs he was able to win the Tour de France in 2006 subsequently, we found out that he was disqualified from that and lost his tour title. So if Paulo Tiralongo, I think he's attempting to defend Chris Froome, but I'm not sure. Maybe he'll clear that up. No question about where Bernardino stands, however. Bernardino quoted as saying, Chris Froome is not a legend, should not be eligible to join Hinault and Eddy Merckx in the only two riders that have simultaneously, or three in a row, won the Grand Tours, Giro, Tour, and Vuelta. The order was different. When the Merckx and Hinault won the Vuelta was in the spring, followed by the Giro, and then the Tour. But he did say one thing that I do agree with, however, that Froome should be serving a suspension currently, not racing in any race, let alone winning the Giro. But to say he's not a legend, it reminds me of a lot of pros that have this tendency to say, when I was a pro, it snowed every day. When I was a pro, every race was uphill into a headwind. And it is a way of discrediting the current riders from being as great as they believe themselves to be. That is totally wrong. And Chris Froome, most certainly, as it stands today, 6 Grand Tours. You're a legend. You're a legend if you won 6 Grand Tours, 4 Tour de France's, Tours de France, if you like, and subject to change, a Vuelta and a Giro title also. Peter Flax, a well-known cycling journalist, wrote this and expressing his disappointment in what had just transpired in the Giro, that he was disappointed that Chris Froome had put himself before the fans in the sport for short-term gain, glory, for the short-term glory of racing and winning the Giro. Chris Froome has put himself before the fans in the sport, which I agree. He did not, Peter Flax did not say that Chris Froome did not earn his Giro title legitimately, did not say that, but Froome blocked him on Twitter anyways. And that reminds me of a number of pros in the past, just before their falls from grace, trying to control the narrative. I've talked about that a lot on BobkeTV, Team Sky, and Chris Froome himself trying to control the narrative, expressing their disappointment that the whole process was leaked, that all of this, we were not supposed to know any of this. We were not supposed to know that all of this has been going on behind the scenes. And that is inexcusable. Rather than argue the merits of what Peter Flax is trying to say, and saying, either agreeing with him that it maybe was for if I'm Chris Froome, my own short-term glory, bad for the fans in the sport, or offering up some sort of alternate argument. Rather than do that, just block him from Twitter and control the narrative. Another, I think maybe what in history will show us the worst things about this is Froome could lose the Giro and the Vuelta, and then it would set the sport back a long ways. The sponsorship model is shaky already. I think he should lose the Vuelta because he had twice the allowed amount of salbutamol in his system, and he's not, nor the team has argued that that is false. It'll be very interesting to see how it shakes out. But also, as I just mentioned, might not be decided before the Tour de France. That would be a disaster. And I think, in all honesty, the fans in Italy have one way of enjoying cycling. The fans in the Tour de France and the people that come to the Tour de France on the side of the road, a very different way than the Italian fans, and much more sensitive to controversial doping situations, and have expressed their anger in horrible ways at Chris Froome already in the past. Chris has already run into that during the Tour de France. So The ASO does have, like I mentioned, a clause in their charter whereby they can block Chris Froome's participation, if I'm not mistaken. And Christian Prudhomme, the director, has already said that if the case is not decided, he does not want to see Chris Froome at the Tour. I agree with that assessment. I think it would be bad for the race, bad for the sport. What do I think is going to happen, though? I'm just going to go worst case scenario because that's what cycling seems to be best at. He'll be at the Tour. The fans will be pissed. The fans will be enraged on the side of the road, and it'll be an untenable situation throughout the 3 weeks, and Chris Froome will win. And then the courts will decide that Chris Froome did indeed violate the anti-doping statutes during last year's Vuelta, and he'll lose 3 Grand Tour titles in one sentence. That's my prediction. All right, everybody, next up, Tweet of the Week. Tweet of the Week coming to us from Peter Flax and quoting George Bernard Shaw. We learn from history that we learn nothing from history. And a picture of Froome with all of his Grand Tour jerseys. What does that remind you of? That's a good tweet anyways. My take, you burned me once, that is your bad. But you burned me twice, I'm going to have to check my own self. I'm a dupe. Oh my God, I'm a fanboy. The horror. All right, everybody, until next time.